Welcome to I Didn't Sign Up for This, a podcast brought to you by Alzheimer's Arkansas. I'm Carolyn, your host. We are going to dive into the complexities and challenges of being a caregiver to someone with Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia. This is just not about the disease. This is about the caregiving experiences, the challenges, the mishaps, the miscommunications, and understanding of how this disease affects families, communities, and our society as a whole. Thank you to Elder Independence Home Care for sponsoring us and underwriting to make this possible, to bring this podcast to the podcast land and you listening. In this episode, I had a lovely chance to speak with Jan Parks, the rock star caregiving. Her experience as a spouse, a mother, a worker will change many perspectives on the face and the look of dementia. Please stay tuned as we dive into her amazing story. Welcome again, those out here in podcast land, to another episode of I Didn't Sign Up for This. And today I have a rock star. So I love to call her a rock star, and I'm sure we'll, because her husband called her a rock star, and I see the rock star in her every day. I remember the first time I met her. So this is the amazing rock star, Jan Parks. So I remember the first time I met her was at a Art Together, a program we had with the Art Center, collaboration with the Arkansas Art Center at that time. And we did a art program where caregivers and their persons with Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia would come in, do a tour, and do an art program. And I remember the day I walked in and I saw you and Warren, and I was like, so what are they doing here? Who has dementia? And it did not cross my mind that it was Warren.
Well, we didn't look like the normal patient.
It did not look like the normal patient. And although I spoke with Warren, he had like short words. I kind of thought he was like an introvert. It did not I was like, oh, that's dementia. And I just thought you were there for like respite or something. So,
well, I had heard of the program through, I work in a medical office, and one of our patients' mother has dementia. And so she had attended the program for each month prior to then and had shared it with me, and I wanted to find something that Warren and I could do as a couple, because that was what was hard. Warren was 50, or I was 50, well, I'm giving my age. I think I was 50 and he was 51 when he was diagnosed. Mm-hmm. And so there was not a lot of people that looked like us in the dementia community, and it was difficult to find things that we could do as a couple where I didn't feel like I was constantly excusing his behavior. It was hard to attend normal social things, even church, because of things that he did that were kind of his odd behaviors now, and they would look offensive or just not be appropriate because of his age. You would not expect him. If he was maybe your grandfather and he did something a little off, then it could be excused, but it wasn't excused of a grown man that was, looked able-bodied.
Able-bodied, yes, and like of a young age, right? We'll
yes,
say that.
Yes.
Of course, you touched my heart in a lot of ways. So let's give a little background information on your family dynamics, because this is very important in your story. Like, even for the people and the family you
right.
are. Okay?
I appreciate that. Well, not to share our whole love story, but Warren and I married when I was 21 and he was 22, and we had 33 years of marriage. During that time, we had 2 biological children. And then shortly before his diagnosis, we adopted a sibling group of 3 teenagers. So at the time of his diagnosis, our home had a 12-year-old, 13-year-old, 15-year-old, 18-year-old, and 23-year-old, and 4 dogs. So we were a very dynamic household. Mm-hmm. We had been foster parents for 5 years prior to the adoption, and there was a lot of grief for me with that, not just that I'm losing my spouse slowly, but I'm losing what my marriage was to look like, what my life, my forever after was to look like, and bringing in children with a trauma background to say, oh, surprise, mm-hmm. Here's some more grief for you to experience. So it was very difficult for me to navigate all of that without resources that I was able to tap into through Alzheimer's Arkansas, and just the support and the knowledge that I wasn't alone, because it was a very isolating experience.
And we have to remember some of this also happened during the pandemic, and that was a whole different
True. Yes, he was
situation.
diagnosed in 2018. He was terminated abruptly, and that's what prompted us to seek medical intervention and diagnosis. So we did this teenage adoption, and then he lost his life insurance, short-term disability, health care, and we were immediately, I became the head of household, the parent, the disciplinarian, the keeper of the memories, and to navigate the medical care for him, to get a diagnosis quickly and then to be able to quickly get services for our family, just to keep our heads above water.
I don't know how many times I've thought about this, and I've never had this conversation with you, is like as a wife with all of these unusual behaviors, losing a job after so many, like how did you keep it together? Like,
Well,
and not walk out
that's
the
brave
door.
of you to say that I kept it together. I guess I
I mean,
did
you
stay
did.
married,
Yeah,
though.
you
That's
did stay
true.
married.
You know, I guess that was my own my commitment to him and our love story, and and my faith that I did believe in the for better for worse. I just did not know that worse was going to be defined as that.
You know, I've talked to families and I was like, sometimes we should probably change this to better, worse, sickness, health, and maybe dementia, because that's a
Well,
whole different.
I have advised my children that they might have anybody they think they're going to pair with long term to have genetic testing. It was not a journey that I would want to repeat. Now I'm thankful that I was in it, and I don't resent it. I can say that now. I don't know if I could have said it in the midst of it. There were so many beautiful things that did occur. As you said, we were during the pandemic, so two of our children were in high school and at home doing Zoom classes, so they became the caregivers so that I could maintain work. Because as I said, I'm the one that's keeping us together financially, so I could continue to work full time. And then the two boys were Zooming with occasionally their father popping in the background and having to. My son, one of them came up with a solution. He put packing. We had to have webcams originally. The rules as Zoom class went on kind of lessened, but in the beginning he had to have a webcam. So he put packing tape over the web camera so he would be distorted, and told his class that he had bad connection. But that was because often Warren would walk into the background or and kind of disrupt what he was doing, and because you had to keep your camera on, that was his solution. And I hate that for him. I hate that he had to know that. I think it's so resourceful, but I just, that was just part of my grief as a parent, that my kids had to become resilient.
Yeah. And I mean, we talked a lot about a lot of stuff that people just don't understand about the disease, and him being young and your children having to become caregivers, and even like how to like stay children but then take care of their father. And I remember one time you called me and Warren was doing something with like they had started asking him permission to do stuff rather than you, because what?
Because he always said yes. Warren would drive them places that they knew they weren't supposed to go. There was one particular time where one child was at a friend's house, and then these were non-driving children at the time, so then they convinced Warren to get in the car and use GPS and go pick up this other friend to then connect them all together. And in that, Warren actually missed a turn and just put his car in reverse and went backwards down a road and hit a car. And, it's so scary to think that we had allowed him to drive all those times prior to then. And sadly, it takes an instant like that for you to finally go, okay, this is it. We're taking away the keys. But yes, my kids did fully make use of his ability to say yes.
Yes, and and you were like, I don't know what to do. And I had my own teenager. We have some kids a child about the same age, and just I'm like, I can't imagine what he would have him doing.
It felt so out of control. It really did. And I'm sure that, any parent of teens feels that sensation from time to time. I just felt like mine was worse. Maybe that's just kind of self-absorbed of me, but it just felt like it was a bigger deal for me to try to keep these kids under rein.
I don't think so. I really think it was the reality of where you are, because like some of the things I just could imagine, even some of the way school policy or schools dealt with your children.
Well, yes, my youngest was actually on a truancy policy. He had the misfortune of any time we were in public, if there was going to be me and Warren and one child, it would be him, and Warren would have an accident, as in urinate or worse in his pants. And so this child was always physically present when catastrophe struck. And yes, we kept a diaper bag in our car, but there's not a lot of places you can take a grown man into to change a diaper.
Yeah.
And that's some of the harshness of being a caregiver that we don't talk about. It's not very glamorous. And I don't think that people realize what caregiving really looks like. And not that I want to share those gory details, but this child then became headache syndrome. And so we found a way to kind of take control of his absences in schools. We had to get a 504 and do a headache contract to allow him 2 absences a month for headaches. And we often use those, and there may not have been a true headache, but it was the best we could do to piecemeal together our family and to maintain him in class and to not put us in truancy court paying a fine and putting him in jail for a weekend.
I mean, so it was like so many dynamics that our society is not ready for, our communities aren't ready for, because we see dementia as a aging disease.
Yes.
Right. When I first started at Alzheimer's Arkansas, it'll be 6 years next month, and I was getting educated, and I was told, like, it's an aging disease. It happens to older people, and I would probably never come across younger people. So I wish that was true.
I do
because
too.
Since then, I have a handful of people who have been diagnosed in their 40s and 50s, and in a lot of situations like you, they have teenage children. Parents, it may be their spouse or their parent, and then trying to navigate through all the systems, school systems, medical systems.
Just time off work for myself to attend appointments. We utilized some daycares once he was at the point where, and the children, when kids were back on campus. So we utilized a couple of different daycare programs, and that was a wonderful resource, but it was also sickening for me. Obviously, as soon as he's diagnosed, my ambiguous grief began, because I've grieved so many things, and there's nothing more humiliating to me, and I had to step out of that occasionally and think, how does he feel? Is he feeling this? But to walk into a daycare with your husband in his diaper bag and give, this is what he ate. It took you back to taking your children and how that felt when you dropped your newborn off with strangers. And I was now doing that with my husband, and it just wrecked me, and I don't know that I could, if the places had not been wonderful and the caregivers there exemplary, I don't know that I could have done it. I couldn't afford to not work, but I just didn't know what else to do. I didn't have other options.
So I remember you saying, and I always think about this, because at his age, at your age, it's a big gap.
It is a big gap
in resources, and I meet that challenge all the time when somebody's 50 calling me when they're 40. So
as you're aware, the Alzheimer's Arkansas does provide grants, but there are certain grants that we don't qualify for because of his age. And there's a program in the hospital, one of the hospitals here in town, that we never got to get to because he was too young, and it was a program that would have been perfect for him. So instead of being in this all-inclusive medical care where we could have a social worker and a nurse and a nutritionist and things, we had to piecemeal all of that together. And a lot of that came because Google research and reading books and finding a Facebook group or a support group and swapping out. I learned of palliative care in an Alzheimer's support group, and that's wonderful. I'm glad that I did, but I hated that should have come from our physician. And as the physicians aren't necessarily trained in dementia. We had 2 different hospice companies, and the first company seemed to have zero clue about dementia. Warren had failed his swallow study, and we would aspirate thick and thin. So we were just eating for comfort, and it was not eating for pleasure. It was not to nutritionally, keep him alive. And that's such a horrid place to be in as a caregiver, to see your husband, waste away in front of you. But we had conflict with one of our nurses who kept trying to feed him, and then it became into a whole medical issue of aspiration. And she was the hospice nurse that should have known, in my opinion, what we were doing, and it didn't seem like we were on the same game plan.
Yeah. And that's when you came into our workshop that day. And
a little broken.
You were broken that day, and I could just see that. I'm like trying to run a workshop, and I'm like, no. And I was like, go. And I was sending people to give you some resources and hospice.
Well,
Arkansas Hospice, yeah.
That day we terminated our contract with the hospice company that we had, and immediately began a contract with a new company on a Thursday. And the very next day, their nurse practitioner was in our home doing the intake. And then that was on a Friday. Then Saturday, a nurse came into our home, and we knew her socially. She was a adoptive parent. So as a foster parent, adoptive parent is a whole other tribe. We're pretty fierce warriors. And so I felt like I was safe and my family was safe because someone that I knew. And I don't think that needed, I mean, it could have been anyone. Because
it just helped. Yeah,
it helped, and this company was phenomenal. And then the next nurse that came, I knew socially as the neighbor of another adoptive family. So that, for me, I knew where I was with the company I was supposed to be with. They were beautiful with our children. There's a blue book that if you've been on hospice care, that's, kind of goes through the stages. And so they sat down with my children and kind of explained where we were, what was to come. And that took so much fear out of them. And I had tried to do that, but it doesn't come the same from the mom
as it comes from
that's with anything we try to tell our children. So it was just, it was an expert to giving them information, not just the mom telling them how things were going to be. And so that made the fear leave, I think, for our kids. Originally, we weren't real sure where the death would occur. And at that point, then we knew we were comfortable. We wanted it to be in the home. That had been Warren's wishes all along. And it just, because the company that we dealt with was so comforting, it was, as smooth of a death as it could be. The transition was beautiful. The 3 of the children chose to be in the room with us. And, I don't have any regrets about the way we did that or this, the company that we used there at the end.
So, we could talk about this forever because I can think of, all the stuff we talked about.
There's so many bad things that happened.
And I don't want to even say that they were
crazy
bad.
things.
Just things that other people outside of your life see as crazy,
Yes.
right? Or why is this happening? And why is he doing this? And otherwise. And, but the beautiful part is your family holding it together. And we can talk a little bit now about after. So I think you're the first person that I know that had his brain sent off, if I'm correct.
We did. It was important to us because of our children to know the true pathology. And we came in contact with a company that then we didn't fit one criteria, then we got sent to another company, and then actually in the hour of his death, we didn't fit their criteria, and then we got sent to a third company. But it worked. It worked out in the end. But it was a little stressful there in those final hours. But it was comforting to know that we had a diagnosis. So while he was alive, we lived with the diagnosis of early onset Alzheimer's, and he had some behavior that didn't quite fit. And someone would say, "Well, does he hallucinate?" And I'm like, "I don't know. He's nonverbal. I don't know how to diagnose that." That was what was very a big burden for me as a caregiver because Warren spoke very little, and I think that was because the aphasia was coming in, and then eventually he was completely nonverbal, and I was the voice, not necessarily of reason, but I was the voice to say this is how the progression is going, and this is what I see. This is, and so I felt this huge burden that I've misdiagnosed him, that I missed something. I felt this obligation to do more research, that you're right, the behavior doesn't fit. So to get the pathology back, a few months after he passed, it was like, oh yes, there was something different. He actually had frontotemporal lobar degeneration on the frontal lobe. He had Lewy body cells on the brainstem, and then he had evidence of Parkinsonian's Alzheimer's. So that would explain why we have so many behaviors that fit under this mixed umbrella of dementia.
So mixed dementia, and
Yes.
we usually educated that is a thing, mixed dementia. So upon receiving that, because I remember you texted me the same
I think
day.
I sent you the 12 pictures of the report, actually.
Yeah, you texted me, it was like, here's all that, and just to see all that, and I know how it struck me. So for you to see all of that and to share that with your children, especially your biological children.
Yes. It did. It kind of put a period on it. Now, of course, it does put that fear of the genetic testing for the children in the future, because we knew with early onset Alzheimer's, it's carried on a specific chromosome. Well, then now we've got different chromosomes that we're going to be looking at. As many people know, a lot of diseases are genetic, but it doesn't mean that you get them. And so that's
Yes.
hard for my kids to fully comprehend. But one chooses to be tested, one chooses to not be tested. And as they're both now of the adult age, I can only honor those decisions and hope that I can be a support for both
For
of
both
them.
of them, yes. So, how are your children? Like, what's life like after?
Well, I could say a glamorous answer for the
No,
podcast.
well, we've had true
We've
state
tr-
because my son's father passed away in 2020 and Warren's
2022.
Yes,
so they've
we
made
share some.
not great life choices, but also some good ones too. I think we are a closer knit family for it. Now, it took effort. It was not something that just naturally fell into place. I am known from coming up with these grandiose plans that the kids have to roll their eyes over. So we've implemented that we'd have family dinners once a month. You can come or not come, but that's a way for us to just, because they are all now adults living, out on their own.
lives, yeah.
Our youngest is a senior, and I feel like he's in a good mental health state. I'm not sure that I would have said that for many of the kids during the disease, but I think we've come to more of a closeness, and we're able to share memories of, remember when we walked Dad and he did this, or remember, and that's just something that, comes with time. I don't know that, if they are at different resent places, because there's not 5 stages. Stages of grief is not linear.
No, it's
and that's what, another thing we need to teach, our therapists is that it's not a linear process, and it's just, it's just kind of you have this post-traumatic growth as you go through, the grief with your children. And I feel like that we are in a better place emotionally. I'm the only one in therapy now, so, that may be a good or bad thing. I did find that very beneficial during, the time that Warren was alive, and that's something that I've maintained. And actually, with my very first Alzheimer's grant that I qualified for, I used to pay my mental health copays. So that was maybe the best thing that I did, the wisest decision as a caregiver.
To get that help. So here you are still holding people together after. How do you keep yourself together? Other than therapy.
Yes. I am a woman of faith, and so that's been something that I've relied on, and I do have support. I have support with, friends that I know through the Alzheimer's journey, but prior to. So I do, try to make myself be social, and it takes sometimes a lot of anxiety processing to get out the door and go to something, because it is different to be the third wheel and to go forth as a widow. I feel like, this is just my opinion, not, something that's written anywhere, but it's, a widow of a different disease is more, and I use glamorous loosely, but I feel like they're more welcomed in society. If you are a widow of someone that had cancer, a young widow, and you have cancer, there's just seems to be a bigger
People
community surrounding.
more
empathetic to that. And it seems like now, if I even, label myself that, I have to go through so much of what Warren had, and yes, it was a disease, and no, we didn't know that happened, and I thought that's what grandfathers got, and so it's just so much, I have to lift them so much just to get them so that they can then empathize with me for being a widow. It's not something that I advertise a lot, I guess, so when I interact with people that don't know me, they don't know that I'm a widow. I still wear my wedding band because that's one of those things that's personal, and I haven't figured out when it's right for me to take it off yet. And it may never come off.
May never, yes. So all of these aspects are so important in the journey, because the journey does not end for many people at death, because you still have to take care of you. You still have to take care of your children, and to say death it may end the disease and the person has passed away, but there's a lot of stuff afterwards.
Absolutely.
And I learned that from you probably so much more, because you are younger, and a lot of times with people that are a bit older, they've lived life, and maybe they don't have all the dynamics that you have, and like how to carry on after the disease and after death. And you've done some great things.
Oh, well, I appreciate
and you're
that.
working on some stuff. So let's talk about that a little bit. Some of the stuff you actually did some other things for Alzheimer's Arkansas to talk about the services we try to provide. I mean, we're working out here hard to
Well,
meet you on your journey.
I'm not fearful of speaking in public, which may be a downfall of my own, but I enjoy being asked about it because I don't think that there's enough education about it. I may not have shared. Warren walked the neighborhood multiple times a day when he was still home alone, and that was something that he did he may not have known he'd gone around the block already, I'm not sure, or just because he was anxious and, and anxiety ridden there. But as the aphasia was more prominent, he did hand signals. So as he passed these different stay-at-home people during COVID, he would give hand signals to other walkers.
Show your T-shirt.
Oh, well, so my neighbor made these. So I have a thumbs up, a peace sign, and then he, for some reason, did this nanu nanu from Mork and Mindy. But those are the hand signals that he gave as he walked to the different, walked the block. And so right after he passed, a neighbor that actually has a T-shirt business said, "Text me your sizes." And I was like, okay. A year later, she provided these T-shirts. So at the time, I thought she's texted the wrong person. But so this past Christmas, she showed up with T-shirts for all of us with his birth and death date on them and his hand signals. Well, then we posted those on social media and saw enough interest that we actually sold T-shirts from Christmas Day to his birth date, which was January 5th, and raised $600
in that short amount of
time to go back to Alzheimer's Arkansas. And
we really appreciate that.
Well, I feel like that covered at least one of the grants that I received, so I still feel there's a need for me to sell more T-shirts. But and there's still been an interest, and it was surprising to me, and it was another warm and fuzzy because I didn't know who purchased T-shirts until they came in. And that was just another, validated me of, oh, that is my friend. They bought that T-shirt. And I mean, there's some of Warren's coworkers bought T-shirts. Some of my coworkers did. Several of my foster adoptive friends did. And then the one that just really tickled me so much is one of our former foster children did. That's now a young adult. And that just, it's nice, warm, and fuzzy. And to know that we impacted other people prior to his disease and then during his disease, not just educating, but just that hopefully that our marriage modeled, what a marriage should look like while being a caregiver. At least maybe an 8 out of 10.
Absolutely. Like, I hold you esteem you in so many things as a parent of young adults and teenagers, and even the bravery you adopted 3 other children to follow through with that, you're amazing and you don't know it. Right?
Well, I appreciate that.
Think about that.
I think you talk about me being a rock star. Warren was actually a drummer since the time he was in 5th grade. He was a wannabe rock star. Now, he played locally, in Central Arkansas in a band, and they also purchased T-shirts, by the way. But he loved to perform. He loved music, and that's why it was kind of ironic that you used that term that we always gave him to label me, because I don't feel like the rock star. I always felt like I was in his shadow, as he could pick up any instrument and play by ear. And I can play piano, but that's with a lot of training, So I don't quite consider myself that label that you've given me, but I thank you for that.
It's amazing. I want to thank you for giving us this part of your life, to sharing some of the most difficult moments. And I know there's plenty more, but like sharing the bright side of a challenging story is the most healing, right?
Yes, it
really,
is.
Really. I want to thank you and your family and your children for just making it through. I have a lot of work for you to do. Like, as I'm talking here, I'm like, you don't know how much work, because you are needed, because there are plenty of families out here struggling with early onset, other dementias, FTD. I think you get that, the normal age range. It's earlier, maybe 45, 60. It's an earlier range
right.
than Alzheimer's itself. So there are many people who are suffering in silence, and your voice is going to help, change policy, get some other resources.
I hope so.
out
It's
here.
funny because there was a time Warren had walked to the front of the neighborhood and had used the restroom in the bushes and couldn't get his pants back up. And someone called me and said, "Hey, are you the wife of the husband who wanders?" And I thought, well, isn't that an interesting title for me? So, why, yes, I am the wife of the husband who wanders. So that's hopefully not his only legacy, but it, I want to normalize caregiving and the disease, because I think it's not talked about enough. And we ourselves we're very timid to share his diagnosis in the beginning. And had we shared it sooner, then our healing and our help and our support could have happened sooner too. And I hope that that's what other people that are in the midst of this or in the beginning stages of being diagnosed will seek out assistance and support.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank
I
you.
can't wait to talk to you a little later, but thank you again for sharing your story and sharing this episode of, I know you didn't sign up for this.
I did not sign up for this. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan Parks, for sharing some of the most vulnerable parts of your family's life. Please subscribe, review, and share this podcast. Thank you to Elder Independence for underwriting. I did not sign up for this. Until next time.